Backing a boycott of Israel, celebrated physicist Stephen Hawking cancels a prestigious conference in Jerusalem in protest at the state's treatment of Palestinians. Conference organizers have slammed the boycott as outrageous and improper. This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Darine Abougaida. Stephen Hawking has become the latest high-profile figure to support an academic boycott of Israel. The world-renowned physicist has pulled out of a conference hosted by Israeli President Shimon Peres. Hawking said he had hoped to express his opinion on the prospect for peace, but was persuaded to withdraw by Palestinian academics. And a letter added, "Had I attended, I would have stated my opinion that the policy of the present Israeli government is likely to lead to disaster." Well, Hawking's decision marks another victory for the BDS movement, the campaign for boycott, divestment and sanctions against Israeli academic institutions. Conference organizers issued this response, and they said, "The academic boycott against Israel is, in our view, outrageous and improper. Israel is a democracy in which all individuals are free to express their opinions, whatever they may be. The imposition of a boycott is incompatible with open democratic dialogue." Al Jazeera's Peter Sharp is in Jerusalem and has been gauging reaction for Inside Story.
The conference in June is attracting major international personalities like Tony Blair, Bill Clinton, Mikhail Gorbachev, and Stephen Hawking's decision to boycott the conference has been greeted in the Israeli media with a mixture of anger and disappointment. This is the right-wing Ma'ariv. It says that those supporting a boycott put heavy pressure on academics and artists to aaavoid all cooperation with Israel. Hawking was an easy target for them, and the boycott campaign is based on spreading lies about Israel. This is Haaretz. The conference chairman, Israel Mamoun, says that Hawking's stand strengthens the extremists. After all, he says extremists don't talk, moderates talk, and this boycott isn't a path that encourages dialogue. Now, the Fair Play Group, which is a Jewish organization that campaigns against these sort of boycotts, says that Hawking's decision was bizarre. They said he could have attended the conference and expressed his views about the regional conference. Staying away accomplished nothing. Hawking himself says he received a barrage of appeals by pro-Palestinian academics to stay away. And his decision is seen in Israel as further evidence of support for an academic boycott. Peter Sharp for Inside Story in Jerusalem.
As I said, BDS stands for the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions Movement against Israel. The campaign was started in 2005 by an alliance of more than 170 Palestinian civil society groups. BDS campaigners have called for various boycotts against Israel, inspired, they say, by those used in the fight against apartheid in South Africa. And a growing number of public figures and celebrities, including Bono, Stevie Wonder and Snoop Dogg, have expressed support for the campaign or refused to perform in Israel. BDS also lobbies against businesses that sell goods it says are produced in illegal Israeli settlements. Let's bring in our guests. We have Sami Hirmez. He's with the BDS movement supporting the academic and cultural boycott of Israel. Larry Greenfield is a longtime Jewish activist and former executive director of the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs. And completing our panel is writer and activist Ben White, who specializes in Palestinian-Israeli affairs. Welcome to all of you to this edition of Inside Story. Before I come to you and ask questions, let me just tell you about the huge response on Facebook we've had to this particular story. David Allen Townsend says it's simply one man expressing his opinion, which he has a right to do, no more, no less. Matthew Walker says the BDS movement will work and it requires influential figures like Hawking to step up and join the fight. Patrick Bates adds, lefties continue their practice of exclusion. They include only those who agree with them. What a shame. And Petros Laridis makes the point. I think Hawking is right about this. I would, however, urge people to remember that it is the Israeli government that are at fault here and not the bulk of the Israeli people. So these are some comments we've had on Facebook. Let's bring in our guests now and discuss this. Sami, if I can come over first to you. For BDS, this is a significant move by Stephen Hawking.
Yes, this is a fantastic move, a very sort of watershed moment, because Stephen Hawking is a sort of mainstream academic that is very well known amongst broad, the general population, not just amongst academics. And so when someone like that boycotts Israel, you have the possibility of a snowball effect. And it speaks to the growing nature of the BDS movement. You have to remember that in South Africa, it took decades before the world started to catch on and begin to boycott. And here we're, only into six or so years of this movement. So it's a really important, moment.
Larry, you don't agree with the decision of Stephen Hawking to boycott the conference?
No, I don't. I respect his right to make any decision that he wants to. Dr. Hawking has been to Israel 4 times, and he's entitled to his point of view. I just don't think boycott leads to peace. I don't think it leads to reconciliation. I don't think it's effective. In fact, it only rallies Israelis, Americans, and Westerners to be skeptical of the motivations of Palestinians who you would think would want economic ties and interdependence and relationships from all over the political spectrum dealing with Israel. And I think it's the BDS movement, of a long economic war against Israel that predates the BDS movement, which hasn't worked either. Israel has flourished. It develops its economy, its culture, its art, its medicine, its science. I don't think BDS is a winner.
Let's put that to Ben. But what do you say to that? Is BDS not effective, as Larry says, and in fact, boycotting will not lead to peace?
No, I think BDS is proving itself to be an extremely effective and welcome strategy. It's a bit of a red herring to talk about it not being conducive to dialogue. There's nothing about BDS that stops people having conversations. I mean, that's what we're doing right now. By boycotting this conference, Stephen Hawking has provoked a debate around the world about Israeli occupation and apartheid policies and how best those can be prevented. And when people around the world listen to the Palestinian people's call for this particular strategy to be adopted, it's empowering people to make a difference. And within Israel, you see that it is already having an impact. There have been legislative efforts to attack boycott activists. Tzipi Livni in the last election, actually, as part of her campaign discourse in the election, said that the policies of Netanyahu were increasing the likelihood of boycott around the world.
Larry?
Well, what is the purpose of boycott? Do you want to destroy the Israeli economy, which is helping the entire region and the world? And in fact, Professor Hawking, some of the computer chips in his communication systems come out of the miracle that is Israel's economy. It won't tell the Americans to befriend the Palestinian cause. It makes us upset with Palestinians, as, for example, when they celebrated the Boston bombing or 9/11. BDS is a left-wing movement. It doesn't resonate with Americans and those who are fair-minded.
I have to interrupt there. I mean,
we
that's
want peace for...
It's a total lie about the Palestinians celebrating the Boston bombings. I mean, it's just misinformation.
Okay, how about 9/11? Did they celebrate 9/11?
You're bringing in a lot of stuff here that is missing the point, and particularly that point about the technology that Stephen Hawking uses is disingenuous and offensive.
Right.
I mean,
that
this
is the
idea
point that I'd like to pick
propagated...
on, Ben. I do apologize for interrupting you, but that is the idea that I want to pick up on with Sammy, in fact. If you can respond to that comment, because there has been criticism that Stephen Hawking is boycotting this conference, yet he must recognize that his equipment that he uses is operated by a chip created by Israel. Thoughts on that, Sammy?
Yeah, I mean, the boycott movement is actually built around this idea that Israel tries to present itself in the world as a hub of academia, technology, culture, and so on. And so the point is that we can't go on as business as usual, right? That the boycott is a sustained form of resistance. If there will be costs, With any form of resistance, there is cost. The Americans and the Israelis are going to be upset at the Palestinians no matter what the Palestinians do, as long as they don't capitulate and as long as they're not pacified. The Israelis and the Americans are going to be upset with the Palestinians, as you know, Larry's trying to bring this up, as if, you know, if we go along with what they would like, then of course, you know, the Americans and Israelis will not be happy. But the boycott is basically telling the world that governments have not acted. The U.S. government has not acted, and most governments in the world have not acted. And so it's incumbent on civil society groups to put pressure on their civil society institutions, universities, businesses, cultural institutions, museums, theater groups, that to isolate Israel in order for policy to then change. Because Israel is not a democracy, it is not a cultural hub. You know, this idea that culture can be outside of the world and be above politics, and academia is above politics. They're not above politics. So Stephen Hawking is not boycotting Israeli individuals, he's boycotting an Israeli institution that is complicit in its government's actions. So, you know, this is something to keep in mind. You know, the focus here is on institutional to institutional mechanisms. And eventually, you know, if we can get to a point where we're boycotting technology chips, then fine, sure. But just because we can't boycott everything doesn't mean we don't boycott something, right? And so you have to start somewhere. So that would be...
Larry.
Why would you want to boycott a society that brings the world cancer-defeating technologies and cell phone chips and help for people who have trouble walking?
Larry, I'm boycotting.
Why wouldn't you want to boycott, divest, and sanction from Arab regimes that terrorize their own people, or the abuse of women and honor killings, or human rights abuse throughout the Muslim world? I was just in Turkey, where there are Muslims who want to work with Israel and for peace and against radical Islam. I suggest that Palestinian society should focus against the people who've been corrupt, have stolen all their money. In fact, the American people would like to boycott the leaders of the Palestinians who've stolen our taxpayer money. If you want peace, if you want reconciliation, you should boycott tyranny under Arabi, not the Israeli beautiful democracy.
You're confusing things. This is really misinformation. I mean, you know, the U.S. government gets above $3 billion of federal money, taxes from the U.S. government. You're accusing the Palestinians of taking U.S. taxpayer money. It's quite frankly, I don't think the audience is even going to buy that. But
really, do you know where the money that Arafat stole
Israeli
is?
apartheid, colonization, and occupation, not the Israeli people. What's that?
So you don't want to talk about Palestinian incitement or rocket firing?
No, what I'd like to, but
money.
I'd like to keep this. I'd like to keep this, in fact, to the BDS movement. The BDS movement, Sami and Larry. Let me just bring in Ben and ask you, Ben, is this going to change the way Israeli people think about the policies and the policies of their government?
I mean, yes, I think that's exactly what the effect of BDS is already starting to have, and will do so more. That's exactly what some of the courageous Israeli activists who support the Palestinian call for boycott are saying. And what you can hear is when Israeli apologists are trying to attack BDS, all are produced are a lot of red herrings and disingenuous distractions. From the point about Stephen Hawking's technology, I mean, BDS and boycott is simply a non-violent means of pressure of the weak against the powerful to effect change, and it's about ending impunity, and it's about accountability. And to claim that because a particular society produces X technology or X products means that the policies of the government are above criticism or sanction is absurd. It would be like a mafia boss going into court and saying, well, let me off extortion and murder because I've given a lot of money to charity.
Larry, what do you think? Is this going to push the Israeli people to put pressure on the government? So will the government be affected in any sort of way?
No, in fact, I plead with you to understand that the left in Israel has been weakened over the years as they sought peace, but they found from Palestinians economic boycotts, diplomatic boycotts, cultural and academic boycotts. It doesn't matter to the Israelis that some lefties from England or artists around the world decide in small numbers to boycott Israel. What matters is, are the Palestinians given the chance by their own leaders to become economically interdependent with Israelis, to grow their society, to be free? Are women and gays given rights in Palestinian society? And is the Arab world more generally an interesting place to do business with and to see freedom grow? We don't see that in some parts of the Arab world. Why not boycott the tyrannies and the terrorism? Why would you boycott the democracy where all range of voices are allowed? The left in Israel has gotten weaker because of Palestinian irredentism and left-wing politics out of Europe.
And Sami, let me ask you this, because there's been some criticism from some people in Israel that in fact criticize the occupation, but have now come out and said that they criticize the cultural part of the boycott and say that it isolates academics in Israel who are critical of the government's policies.
I mean, I think that these are voices, if they really understood, if they were for full Palestinian rights. This is not just about the occupation. The BDS movement is calling for full equality of Palestinians. So you have a apartheid government in Israel. It's not a democracy. It never has been a democracy. It's just about as much of a democracy as South Africa was a democracy for white people, right? So you have a different set of laws for Israeli Jews and Israeli Palestinians. And so the BDS is fighting for the rights of Palestinians in Israel, but also for the right of return and for the right to end the occupation. And so there's a movement in Israel that is sort of the people who criticize the cultural boycott, in a sense, are sort of afraid of making the larger argument that this is about full Palestinian rights and not just about the occupation. Palestinians all over the world are oppressed by this, by an Israeli apartheid government, which is, this isn't about Israel's sort of right to exist or not to exist. This is about real, legitimate international violations under international law. It is a violation of the crime of apartheid. It's a violation of the resolution on colonialism. It's a violation of the occupation is illegal. So these are the things that we're attacking here, that we're trying to resist. And I think there is a growing movement. I think Larry is missing the point when he's saying that this is sort of a minority, because the Israeli government has passed laws against boycott. The Israeli lobby in this country, in the U.S., in Europe, have spent a lot of money trying to combat this movement. And I think that speaks to the growth, the momentum, and the serious pressure it puts on Israel. And I think the Israeli government recognizes this.
Right. So I think what you're saying, Sami, is that the Israeli government is in a way worried. Larry, what do you make of these comments by Sami, and specifically that, in fact, it is a fact that the Israeli government has passed laws against boycotting in Israel?
Yes, I see the boycotts as a hostile act, as a part of a long tradition of economic boycott and warfare against Israel. I think it backfires. The Palestinians would benefit by friendship with the West, with the investor community, with the political community, with Washington, with serious people around the world. When they boycott our friend, our ally, a democracy, and they're invited to speak their mind. Stephen Hawking has been to Israel 4 times before. All they're doing is offending potential friends in the West who wish well for the Palestinians, wish well for Muslims around the world, wish well for women in the Arab world, for example, and wish well for Christians being persecuted by Arabs and bad governments. Why not boycott, divest, and sanction real human rights abuse? Just picking on Israel is seen now by the West as an offensive, warlike act, part of a long tradition of economic boycott of the one tiny democracy. And last sentence, the Arabs in Israel, and I know you're all going to laugh, have more rights in Israel to run for parliament or work or speak their mind or write articles in the press than they do in many of the Arab states.
Ben.
Yeah, well, I mean, the problem with a lot of these points is based on this false idea of Israeli democracy and the comparison between the conditions of Palestinians with Israeli citizenship is not with an Arab somewhere else, but actually with their fellow Jewish citizens, and in that context, they're systematically discriminated against. I also wanted just to emphasize how it's a myth that boycott is damaging because of it some way harming the Israeli peace camp. There is no peace camp in the sense of a sizable number of Israelis, unfortunately, that support full Palestinian rights, that support equality for Palestinians. And in fact, kind of that question or that doubt about BDS belies a bigger problematic analysis of the whole situation. This is not a husband and wife negotiating divorce. This is not two warring tribes who need to reach a compromise. There is one regime between the river and the sea, controlled by the Israeli state, which privileges one group, Jews, over another group, Palestinians. And understandably, as we've seen in many other situations historically, the group that has power is not going to cede that voluntarily. That's exactly what Martin Luther King said. That's what we saw happen in South Africa too. And the idea of boycott, a time-honored strategy of nonviolent pressure, is to make the status quo unsustainable, to make the privileges that the group at the top of the ethnocracy, to make those privileges unsustainable and unworkable. That's been the Palestinian call for people outside, and that's the call that's being increasingly answered.
Larry, your response?
I would say that the Palestinians do live in areas that they control in Gaza and the West Bank. And why are we not focusing on Palestinian leadership, which incites hatred? It's in the school books, it's in the textbooks, it's in the songs. Okay, the Palestinians vote for their own leaders, they run their own economy, they have their own lands. The Israelis withdrew from Gaza completely. Hamas took over. Not in Gaza.
I think you're
actually
trying to,
the Gaza Strip is still considered under occupation.
This is happening in a broader context.
Sammy, go ahead.
I was saying this is also Larry speaking as if there isn't a broader context of what the Israeli government is doing in these territories. One, they're occupied ultimately, and they're answerable to the Israeli government. So they're, even if the Palestinians were to vote, and they haven't been able to recently because of initially boycotts by the Israeli government and the U.S. on the Palestinian people. There is a larger issue here that gets missed. I mean, you can basically, in a sense, pacify the Palestinian population so that they can organize their little mini government under an Israeli occupying power. But that is, that's what the French tried to do in Algeria. I don't think we would accept that anywhere else in the world.
All right, well, let me just ask you, Sammy, let me just stop you right there, because I'd like to bring up, I do apologize, but let me just bring up a couple of points, because Palestinians have been enjoying, in fact, broader support from the international community. In November, for example, the United Nations upgraded Palestine's status from what it called an entity to a non-member observer state. And as of April, 132 of the 193 member states have formally recognized the state of Palestine. Israel, most of Europe, the United States, Canada, and Australia do not recognize it. And just this week, Google put Palestine on the virtual map, changing the tagline on its website from Palestinian territories to Palestine. Sammy, let me just ask you about the BDS movement over in the United States and whether you've seen any significant shifts when it comes to influencing U.S. policy and the U.S. government on Israel.
Yeah, I think you can see a significant shift in the sort of public opinion amongst civil society. There have been a number of successes, actually just this month, several successes in terms of student unions at student senates at universities have passed resolutions for boycott. So at Oberlin, at UC Berkeley, but also academic associations, the Asian American Studies Association. And so these are, you see the beginnings of civil society shifts after there has already been over the last 6-7 years a shift in opinion amongst people. Now you're seeing actions taken at universities to isolate, and ultimately the idea is that this is going to put pressure up above to changing policy. But when Obama comes out a year ago, I think, talking about boycott in his speech, even though he's against, at least now that we're in the public debate. When Mayor Bloomberg has to come and make come out and make a statement against BDS, we are now getting the eyes and ears of these politicians, and eventually I think that this shift is going to take place where you're going to have more support amongst politicians.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you.
Resolutions being passed. And
thank you to my guests, Sami Hirmez, Larry Greenfield, and Ben White. And thank you for watching. You can always find this program and many more at aljazeera.com. Just follow the links for programs and then click on Inside Story. And you can always leave us your comments as well. Thanks for watching. For me and the whole team, goodbye for now.